Thank you everybody for being here. I'm Professor Kim Miller. I'm just going to introduce the event, and then my colleague is going to introduce our speaker. Welcome to the wide, wide world of graphic design. This is our annual endowed lecture series that we have for the Department of the History of Art. It's a real privilege to be able to sort of extend this space to our new design major and colleagues who are teaching in design and students who are majoring in design and take design classes. And we're really privileged to have Doug Scott here today to share his knowledge and expertise with us. So I'm going to thank our funders who helped make this annual event possible. I'd like to acknowledge the Wheaton College Friends of Arts, the Department of History of Art and Visual Arts, and I want to express gratitude to my colleagues in the department for being here and for supporting the event, and also the Visiting Artist Program. I'd like to thank Jessica Kujai, who is Associate Director of Arts, Events, and Publicity, also for doing a substantial amount of work organizing the event. And with that, I would like to introduce my colleague, Tanya Schlatter, Professor of the Practice in Design, who will introduce our guest speaker.
Hi, everybody. I'm so glad that you're all here today for this special event. It's an honor for me to give a little introduction to Professor Douglas Scott. Doug Scott, who's a graphic designer, creative director, and design historian. Brief bio. Professor Scott received a Bachelor of Architecture from the University of Nebraska and an MFA in graphic design from Yale University. Since then, he has worked, taught, mentored extensively in Boston, Providence, and well beyond, sharing his knowledge of design generously with students and practitioners alike. And a few highlights. In 2016, Professor Scott was a recipient of the AIGA Boston's Fellow Award for his contributions to the Boston design community. At RIC, where he teaches, he was a recipient of the John R. Fraser Award for Excellence in Teaching. So my connection is that I grew up in Boston, and I was aware of the work produced by Professor Scott for WGBH, the Boston Public Broadcasting Station. But I was not aware of him or of the team behind the work that I saw. I was aware of the graphic identity for the station and the shows that it produced, like Zoom and Mystery, and these made a big impression on me. The aesthetic style was often loose, it was playful, yet it was combined with an attention to detail. So these qualities came through in set designs, in still and motion graphics. Everything produced by the design department at WGBH felt finely crafted, and I loved the clarity and intentionality of the visual languages that I saw. And I was fortunate to come to know of Professor Scott when I was a recent graphic design graduate through his work with the Boston AIGA. That's a professional association, American Association of Graphic Artists. So at the time, he was a leader in the AIGA organization and curated the exhibition, The Roots of Modern American Graphic Design. And at the time, I was graduating, and this show was a big deal in the community. And he was also creative director at WGBH in Boston. As a recent graphic design grad, I was determined to work at the station. So I applied not once but twice to a junior designer position, and I finally got the job. Once at WGBH, I learned to apply the fundamentals of typography and layout from Professor Scott and the team. When a project we worked on together went to press, Professor Scott brought me along to see it printed and to proof it on press. That was my first time I'd ever been to see work printed. It was the first of many times that were to come, but I had an excellent introduction to what to pay attention to and what was important. Much later, when I started teaching at Northeastern, I reconnected with Professor Scott. He shared his syllabi, tips, and gave me a key to his office. These were kindnesses that he did not have to do, and I'm grateful for them. I've learned a great deal from Professor Scott, who is always teaching. In fact, he gave me a few tips this afternoon that I will definitely be putting into practice. So I'm excited that he's here to speak to you at Wheaton. Please welcome Professor Douglas Scott.
Okay, thanks Tanya for all those kind words. And also thanks for inviting me here to speak about the wide world of graphic design. Thanks to Kim Miller, Jessica Kushai, Christy Mahoney, and Tanya, of course, one of my esteemed former colleagues at WGBH. Thanks for graciously arranging this visit. And also thanks to Christina for setting up our audio-visual connection. I've been making graphic design for over 56 years, and I have been teaching graphic design, including design history, for 51 of those years. For 35 of those years, I worked at WGBH Boston, public television and radio, where I did almost every kind of graphic design I will show you tonight. So what is a graphic designer? Essentially, a graphic designer is an organizer of information or messages. The goal, most often, to make things clear, accessible, and appropriate. Here is a booklet I wrote and designed with another teacher friend, Jeff Freed, who was teaching at Lesley University. We did this for the American Institute of Graphic Arts to talk about design education, who we are, what we value, and what we teach. After deciding on a format, the main essay was set in black serif type, you can see here. And then supported by quotations, which we chose, that were typeset in red sans serif type. It was printed on a 2-color press and bound into a 16-page booklet. Everything was supervised and created by me and Jeff. It was mailed to all members of the Boston chapter of AIGA. It is a pretty typical job. Graphic designers measure success based on 3 semiotic principles: form, meaning, and use. Shown here are 2 posters I have done. The first is for an exhibit on the Department of Transportation symbols designed by Kopachanowski and implemented in 1974. This is for a little exhibit I did on these at Rhode Island School of Design, where I have taught for 44 years. I chose one of the symbols, as you can see, a person at the ticket counter, to speak for themselves. The person behind the counter is talking about all the symbols. And the person on the front is telling the viewer when and where the exhibit is. The poster at right, another job I have done, much more complex presentation. It's for a lecture I gave at Brown University about 12 years ago. It is about the history of printing. I am inviting the viewer into a rich and exciting space that displays a Dutch image from the 1620s. 6 chunks of type explaining the talk, who I am, when and where it will be, and that enticing edibles will be served. And that it is sponsored by the Watts History of the Book program at Brown University. My poster is promising that the talk will be colorful and exciting, just as I hope you will find tonight's talk. Graphic design shares attributes and outcomes with many other design and arts disciplines and job titles seen on this slide and the next. Here we see architecture, industrial design, landscape architecture, stage design, window design, textile design, printing, surface design, furniture and apparel design, film and video, experience design, interior design, writers, game designers, curators, automotive and other vehicle designers, costume and lighting design, animation design, and stylists. As one who has worked as an architect, designer, curator, writer, and artist, I feel confident in my ability to make or do about 20 of these jobs. On this slide, we see collage artists, event planners, presentation designers, instructional designers, planners, from those who create plans for cities to those who plan weddings, photographers, ceramicists, printmakers, glass artists, jewelry designers, painters, and I'm including muralists in this category, sculptors, illustrators, including those who do medical illustration, cartoonists, graphic novels, and comic artists, teachers, historians, engineers, chefs, drawers, and installation artists. I have everything in common with all these people. I have organized the talk by showing the things that graphic designers make. Graphic design, or as some call it, visual communication, has been done, I think, since 3400 BC, even though the term graphic design is an early 20th century name, which first popped up as a title of a course in a Berkeley, California arts and crafts school in 1917, or, as many people think, in an article in the 1922 Boston newspaper in an interview with W.A. Dwiggins, a Boston calligrapher, advertising designer, book designer, type designer, illustrator, and puppet maker, who used the term graphic design to describe himself and his work. The Boston Public Library holds the largest collection of his work. In this slide, we not only see the category poster, but we also see the three primary approaches in the 20th century. First, pictorial, which usually uses an illustration. It is often humorous. Secondly, we have constructivist, which uses the typeset text and images that are either mechanically made hard-edged drawings or photography. And thirdly, expressionist, works that are hand-drawn, dreamlike, and sometimes dark, with hand-drawn lettering. These posters advertise soap made from milk by the French designer Savignon, a musical performance by the Swiss designer Joseph Müller-Brockmann, and a theatrical performance by the Polish designer Czerniawski. Often designers are swayed by prevailing styles. Here we see the Czech Alphonse Mucha in the swirling curves of Art Nouveau for job cigarette papers, and the geometric and airbrushed posters of A.M. Cassandra, a Ukrainian-born French designer in the Art Deco style from the 1920s and 30s for a popular aperitif. Another primary issue we face as designers is the relationship of word and image. Here we see an example from ancient Assyria, in which a relief of a king and a retainer are covered with a text carved in cuneiform writing system. And at right, the Bayeux Tapestry of the year 1100, approximately, which tells the story of the Norman invasion of Britain. It is an embroidery, we think, made entirely by women. From the later 20th century, we see a poster for the Pirelli Tire Company by the Swiss-Italian designer Laura Lamb. This features her illustrations of fruit above photographs of tires, logo, and typeset text. In the middle, a poster for the 1964 Tokyo Olympics, designed by Yusaku Kamakura, with one of the most perfect sports photographs I have ever seen, in which the runners are frozen in mid-step. This is by Osamu Hayasaki, the photographer. And lastly, a poster by Milton Glaser for the Bob Dylan album. The name is hand-drawn and influenced by Art Deco Italian lettering. The silhouette image of Dylan was inspired by a self-portrait by Marcel Duchamp. Glaser, one of the founders of Pushkin Studio, which led a revival of both Art Nouveau and Art Deco styles in the 1960s, added the psychedelic hair. Designers are drawn to two opposing directions. The first, a complex maximal approach, as seen by this poster for an art show in 1994 Seattle by the designer Art Chantry. Or on the right, a 1960 Swiss poster for a film exhibition by Joseph Miller-Brock, which follows a simple, minimal aesthetic. A major graphic design activity is advertising. From the early 1900s, we see an ad for a new razor, the Gillette Safety Razor, which had just been invented, which is so safe, even a baby can use it, as we can see here. And on the right, a poster for Stiller shoes by the German designer Lucien Bernhard. It simply explains the name of the company and their product. These so-called object posters were developed in Germany from 1905 in response to the increasing use of tram cars in which passengers would get a quick glance at posters in the street as they sped by. The posters had to communicate quickly. Bernhard was one of the first professional graphic designers of the 20th century. He emerged in about 1900 Berlin. They offered design services, these professional designers, separated from printers. They designed marks and logotypes, signs, packaging, letterheads, posters, books, and other marketing materials. Also in advertising here, a 1937 ad for Dole pineapple juice by Cassandre, the French designer. He created a Hawaiian ambiance and demonstrates that just a bit of text is necessary with the dominant airbrushed image. And on the right, two Volkswagen ads by the ad agency Doyle Dane Bernbach. These create a symbiotic relationship between text and image. How can anyone not read the text when Volkswagen shows a picture of their car and calls it a lemon? The text says that the glove compartment trim was marred. But one of the inspectors saw it, had it replaced, and the car left the factory in perfect shape. The ad at right shows the lunar excursion module, the VW logo, and text is ugly, but it gets you there, which is what people said about Volkswagens. The ad equates the Volkswagen with the highest level of technical achievement of 1969. Typography, or the art of arranging messages in text, has been a favored technique since movable type was invented by the Chinese in the year 1000. Here is a title page designed and printed by Benjamin Franklin in 1744, and a Boston poster warning black citizens that the police can return escaped slaves. This is one of my favorite typographical pieces. It is wrapping paper for Dutch margarine by Piet Zwart of 1924. It is full of all kinds of information of what's in the margarine and what you do with it. And on the right, a music event poster of 1997 by Neville Brody. This is the kind of poster it takes you a while to stand in front of this and eventually decode the message. Many graphic designers are involved in the book arts of paper making, bookbinding, and printing. The more one knows about these, the better the work. Since so much of graphic design contains words, designers have created lettering and calligraphy, as well as type design. On the left is a Viennese Art Nouveau poster by Alfred Roller, which includes his extraordinary lettering at the bottom. This is today a digital typeface known as Mojo. Secondly, the Cheltenham family of types, created in 1902 by architect Bertram Goodhue and Morris Fuller Benton. I hope it looks familiar to you. It is the headline type of the New York Times. I also discovered today, when Tanya was taking me around the campus, that the campus plan here at Wheaton was done by Ralph Adams Cram, prominent architect of the turn of the century, the 20th century, and a partner of Goodhue, the designer of this thing. several of the typefaces designed on the computer by Susanna Lichko of Emigre Type Foundry. These were done in the late 80s. Her typefaces celebrated the low-resolution quality of early digital manufacture. They were in stark contrast to the classical revivals of other companies, such as Adobe, who were making new versions of typefaces such as Jensen, Garmin, and Caslon, faithfully derived from historical models of the 15th to the 18th centuries. Almost all graphic designers create printed ephemera, not meant to last long. Cards, tags, schedules, calendars, announcements, brochures, etc. Here are two advertising cards for the 19th century for Boston's Baker's Chocolate Company. I actually have something to tell you about Baker's Chocolate, and that is that when Abraham Lincoln was a young man, he worked in a small store in New Salem, Illinois. And in that store, there was only one branded product. Everything else was a commodity that came in bags and boxes. That one product was Baker's Chocolate. It was used in baking. My favorite thing below there is the Heinz Pickle Girl. This is a trade card. So if you bought lots of Heinz products, you would be given this little card that was die cut in the form of a pickle. I own one. I think it cost me $2.50. And this was a gift from the company to you for buying their products. And in the middle, a Swiss home goods store from the 1960s. And at right, a Santa Fe railroad schedule from 1915. Information and data visualization has an ancient history, as seen in this Islamic visualization of knowledge of the human body. This is from the 14th or early 15th century from the Middle East. On the right, the use of isotypes, small symbols, in charts, introduced by Otto and Marie Neurath in 1920s Austria. This chart shows the rise of factory-made cloth from 1820 to 1880. As you can see, in 1820, everyone, those little black symbols there are showing you they were making cloth at home. And then the little symbols in the red boxes with the chimneys there are people now making factory cloth. And you can just see eventually nobody is making it at home anymore, and everyone's making it in factory. And you can also see the growing tonnage of fabrics in the little blue symbols. In 1933, Henry Beck introduced his simplified cartogram of the London Underground, which is half map, half diagram, and is, as you probably know, the model for over 90% of the world's transport maps. Beck was an electrical draftsman who made a plan of the subway system, not exactly connected to the geographic position of the stations. All the spaces between the station lines there are equal. The subway lines conform to 90 and 45-degree lines, which is not exactly how it happens in London, as does the River Thames. Over the years, as new lines were added, the existing map lines were easily moved right or left to accommodate the new lines. Seen on the right is from an access guide created by a very important information designer, Richard Saul Werman. He had this diagram made to explain all aspects of healthcare in an intensive care unit. Another area of major activity is exhibit design. At left is a 1600s example of a Danish collection of natural history items. The problem, of course, is how do you fit all that in the room and how do you organize it? At right is a groundbreaking Soviet exhibit of press and publication examples shown in Germany in 1928, designed by the Russian L. Lizinsky. Exhibitions like this were sponsored by the Soviet government to travel and featured moving belts that held examples of books, magazines, and newspapers. This technique is perhaps the first exhibit with a moving part and simulates the large rolls of paper pulling through the web of printing presses. two exhibit examples. On the left, one that perhaps many of you have seen is from the Boston Museum of Science. Designed by the husband and wife team, Charles and Ray Eames. It is Mathematica. It's designed in 1960 and has been renovated a couple of times, but the design is always exactly the same. It is full of all kinds of things that help explain the ideas of math. And on the right, one of the more powerful exhibits in the United States, the Holocaust Museum in Washington, designed by the leading exhibit designer in America today, Ralph Applebaum Associates. This was done in the early 1990s. I should say it's also something I teach at RISD. Books are the perfect container of information. Text only or with accompanying images. We have a long history with books. First example I'm showing you here is from Ethiopia in the early 15th century, which means it was entirely made by hand. The images and text are in the Amharic writing system and features text about two Ethiopian saints, Abba Daniel and Emperor Aronius. The Penguin book system and standards were created by the German-born Swiss designer Jan Schickel in the late 1940s and are still in effect today. At the time, in the late 30s, the British mass-market book typesetting had fallen into poor craftsmanship and fast turnaround haphazardly typesetting. Schickel wrote the Penguin Rules of Typographic Composition, which stressed high quality and exacting standards. Since almost every major British typesetter did work for Penguin, these rules had to be adhered to in order to get work. Within 2 years, the overall quality of book typesetting in Britain and that of its divisions around the world reached an astonishing level of perfection. It is still that way today. This book, The Bald Soprano, designed by the French designer Robert Massin in 1964. It shows the text in a radical, voice-like relationship to each character. At right is a Dorling Kindersley book that emphasizes the primacy of images and revolutionized the children's book industry in the 1980s. Perhaps it looks familiar to you. I think many of us have these books at home. And of course, we have the covers of books. Home to Harlem here was done in the 1920s by Aaron Douglas, an African-American designer of the Harlem Renaissance. His strong geometric shapes and letters and simple color palette made powerful covers. We also see two paperback book covers of Paul Rand for vintage books in the 1950s. Rand's covers are conceptual. The Captive Mind here on the left of these two by Seshoff Niosh shows the dangers of government censorship in Cold War Poland. Marguerite Duras' book cover, designed by Louise Feely in 1983, is a perfect combination of photograph, text, and color. And then, at right, a series of books is always a challenging assignment. These 5 covers of the works of Camus, designed by Helen Yentis, are masterful in their use of black and white, done in the early 2000s. Stamps and currency designs highlight what specific countries value. These stamps, done by Bradbury Thompson, honor Native American art, love, American history, and education. The 2 Swiss 1995 banknotes by Jörg Zinsmeier honor composer Arthur Honegger and artist Sophie Teuber-Ark, both Swiss-born. This Oxford Gazette newspaper of 1665 shows its origins in book pages. By the 1890s, large multicolored web printing machines brought color into everyday life. This issue from March 1898 explains the new lessons. They haven't changed that much since then. This example of The Guardian, one of my favorite newspapers, shows an excellent design system for a 2005 newspaper competing with magazines, television, and websites. At right is a recent improvement from the New York Times, a monthly section intended for kids only. It states that this section should not be read by grown-ups. These examples are from 2017, but they still continue every month. Of course, I collect them all. I don't read them, I just collect them. Identity, one of the most important areas of engagement for graphic designers. At left are ancient Sumerian designs for identity. People would commission proto-designers, I would call them, to create a cylinder seal, which was worn around one's neck on a cord, and then was used to roll their signature into clay as a signature in some kind of contract. I will also tell you, these are very small. We have lots of them at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. And when the country of Iraq was attacked, I think in 2002, by Allied armies, including the United States, the Iraqi Art Museum was broken into that week, and the thing that people took most of was these little cylinder seals, because they were easy to stuff in your pockets and run. There was a huge story on the front cover of the New York Times when that occurred. And then over the years, I've seen other little stories pop up, and now recovered most of these little seals, because people tried to sell them on the open market because they're from 3400 BC. They weren't able to do it. On the right, two pieces of Japanese clothing showing clan marks, known as mon, M-O-N. These were developed starting in the early 900s to identify members of specific clans. Today, many Japanese companies use marks derived from the mon, such as Mitsubishi, which is 3 chestnuts. These are influential not only in the design of 21st century Japanese corporations, but also all kind of corporate identity programs owe their existence to these marks. This notice at left in the hand there is from Procter & Gamble. And it is warning others not to usurp their moon and stars mark, or they will face prosecution. This was from the 1870s. And at right, the mobile gasoline identity system of 1964, created by Shemaev and Geismar, working with industrial designer Elliot Noyes. It is a model of consistent use of circles, from the O in mobile to the round canopies protecting the gas pumps, to the circular gas pumps themselves, to the rounded corner signs, and then also, of course, using the rounded typeface features. It is a symphony of circles. Propaganda and protest are also areas of great interest to us. The first example here is by the artist Duncan Grant, printed in 1909 in Britain to support women's suffrage. It's one of the first uses of a metaphor in posters. Posters were critical in supporting government efforts during major wars. On the right is an Austro-Hungarian World War I poster that states, "Subscribe to the 7th War Loan." It is by designer Alfred Offner, done in 1917. The Austrian gold coins seem to be protecting the Austro-Hungarian soldiers. This piece on the left is a page from the Black Panther newspaper. It was done by Emory Douglas in the early 1970s. It shows President Gerald Ford being manipulated by large American corporations. And the poster at right, published by an Australian Aboriginal organization to alert pregnant women about the dangers of smoking and alcohol. Packaging is a combination of identity, advertising, and information. At left is an early package, a pin wrapper from the year 1700. It is simply a piece of paper. On the back, there was a place where you would stick the pins. Many of you, I think, have seen those. And in the middle, one of the first branded soap products, which includes a promise of purity. It is called Sunlight Soap. And this is a time when people would buy soap that was unbranded. Now, what's interesting is when I go into my local Whole Foods, I see lots of unbranded soap. And I think because of when I grew up, I do not trust that unbranded soap. So I don't buy it. I buy the ones that have a name on the front so I can look them up and see what's in it. At this time, when this soap was made, many nefarious people were making soap out of bacon grease and other caustic materials that you put in soap. So that's why it was important. And then to the right, a beautiful small Art Deco face powder box from Japan. This slide shows the iconic packaging of Crabtree and Evelyn, art directed by Peter Winded, to make their packages have an old-fashioned, traditional look. And at right is a wool wash, an Australian package, in the form of a skating board. And of course, the world of digital media and interaction. At left, the website for the Cooper Hewitt Design Museum in New York. This was done by Pentagram partners Eddie O'Hara and Michael Garrity. On the right, the MasterPass piece represents the ability to create systems for small screens. This is part of the overall identity for MasterCard, designed by Pentagram partner Michael Garrity. Magazines have played an important role in delivering information and telling stories. The first example here is from 1865. It is Godey's Ladies' Book. Aimed at women, it often included actual patterns for making clothing. The other is a 1930s Harper's Bazaar issue designed by Alexei Brodovich, whose work is currently being shown at the Barnes Foundation in Philadelphia. Brodovich at Harper's Bazaar and his contemporary M.F. Aga at Vogue, Vanity Fair, and House and Garden were responsible for using, for the first time, a two-page spread design, not two separate pages, but one that cohered together. Also, high-quality photography, new typefaces, and most of all, they were responsible for training the first generation of women art directors. This spread from the 1960s McCall magazine by Otto Storch shows hundreds of real sandwiches. This is before using things like Photoshop to simulate real sandwiches. I think it's one of my favorite magazine spreads of all time. Unique music packaging begins in the late 1930s when young designer Alex Steinweiss began making illustrated album covers for Columbia Records. Two examples at left of his eclectic work, where he uses different illustration styles and different typefaces. In the middle are jazz covers done by African-American Emmett McBain for jazz labels. And for the Boston band, the Pixies, designed by British designer Vaughan Oliver for the 4AD label. This shows the complex layered assemblage of disparate elements prevalent in late 20th century graphic design. Another major area of engagement, wayfinding and signs. I have chosen the British road system, inaugurated in the 1950s by Jacques Kinnear and Margaret Calvert. Their system overhauled an entire country's road signs, replacing a motley, confusing mess that had been haphazardly built up over 50 years. Shown at the right is the pioneering work in airport sign system done in the late 1950s and 60s by Jane Davis Doggett that set the standard for navigating airports in the jet age, showing the color-coded approaches and the signs also inside the airport terminals. At left is the system created for the Mexico City Olympics in 1968. Art directed by Edgardo Terrazas and Lance Wyman, which not only designed the Olympic signs, but also upgraded the entire Mexico City transport system signage. On the right is a system created by 212 associates with the Children's Hospital in Boston. Some of you perhaps have been in there. They made symbols and color for each of the 5 connected buildings, mindful that children would get the Fagan building name starts with an F, like a fish symbol, flower for Farley, hat for Honeywell, moon for Maine, and boat for the Bader building. And the final category, film and television. At left, one of the many title sequences created by Saul Bass for the film industry. Here, Man with the Golden Arm, done in about 1954. Bass, working primarily with Otto Preminger and Alfred Hitchcock, created a short opening film in front of the film that told an interesting story that got you into the film. The film title sequence was also used to create advertising and promotional items, all based on that title design. In the center, an opening sequence for an excellent film, The Thomas Crown Affair, designed by Pablo Ferro. And on the right, from the BBC television series Tinker Tailor, Soldier Spy, in which a group of nested Russian dolls refers to a mole in British intelligence. It was designed by Douglas Bird. On the left is one of the pioneers of American television, George Olden, African-American art director for CBS TV in the 1950s. He designed the titles of hundreds of television programs in a myriad of styles. And the last images at right are from the recent series Jack Ryan, artfully designed by Karen Fong from Imaginary Forces. The title credits merge 2 images together in a long sequence. Here you see the radial street pattern in Paris merged with a bicycle wheel, and a container ship is merging into American military battle rig. So, we have just taken a quick tour of the wide, wide world of graphic design, full of different approaches and styles, creating many forms of visual communication, all in service of identity, publication, persuasion, information. We have seen that graphic design has ancient roots and is constantly adapting to the emergence of new technologies, new forms, and of course new means. Thanks for inviting me.